Hi, my name is Kathy Hughes. The project proposal for today is developing academic vocabulary and increasing content understanding in an elementary mathematics bilingual classroom through the use of interactive word walls. The purpose of this project is to implement strategies utilized in interactive word walls and apply them in an elementary classroom setting for 6 weeks, which covers money and graph units in a second grade mathematics classroom, to address the following questions. How does using interactive word walls help students to better understand academic mathematics vocabulary? And are students better able to understand content-specific academic vocabulary and apply it? So why interactive word walls? There is a lot of research that suggests that language acquisition is a crucial component for student success. Language acquisition is a struggle for English language learners, which I will refer to as ELLs, especially in a mathematics classroom setting. There are many language acquisition strategies and tools available, things like flashcards or using dictionaries, the use of traditional word walls, and now you have interactive word walls available. Research has been conducted in science interactive word walls at an elementary and middle school level. But what about mathematics? My goal with this research project is to be able to better assist my ELLs in the classroom and also to add to the mathematics interactive word wall research pool. The literature review presented today includes the following themes: word walls and their use, interactive word walls, instruction delivery, which includes planning a word wall, and lastly, interactive word walls in a bilingual mathematics classroom setting. My first topic is word walls in their use. At its simplest form, a word wall is a set of pre-selected words that are posted in a classroom physical space, and it's meant to be referenced by students, and it's meant to be referenced often. In this section, I am going to reference Jane Wagstaff's personal educator experiences from her article, Building Practical Knowledge of Letter-Sound Correspondences, A Beginner's Word Wall and Beyond. I will also tie in Beck McCown-Kukan's work and Claire Siebold's work with Jane Wagstaff, and then further develop this into the evolvement of word walls. So Jane Wagstaff is an educator who taught second grade first. She created her word wall based off patterns. So for example, if she had the pattern A, K, E, she would put words like make or lake beneath that pattern and then post that in a specific designated spot in her word wall. So when students referenced it, they knew which pattern to look at. Now in kindergarten, Jane Wagstaff realizes this is not developmentally appropriate for the age group that she is now teaching. And so she goes from a pattern word wall to an ABC wall. And if you notice in her ABC wall, she also has in between each of those common alphabet letters, she has sounds. So for example, BR goes between B and C because it starts with the letter B. And then she lists her word brown, which follows the pattern BR. She also has ch, which falls between C and D because it starts with the letter C. And she has the word cheer, which follows that pattern. And so something that you need to notice from this word wall is that 1, it's in alphabetical order, and 2, it's adapted to best meet the needs of kindergartner students who are just now learning the beginning sound of a word. To tie in Beck, McCown's, and Kukan's work in Robust Vocabulary Instruction 2nd edition, it is crucial for students to be exposed to words in a written form. Students are already coming in with a base of knowledge of words that they hear orally all the time. They absorb these words from their environment, and so they already know these words. But if you want a student to learn an academic vocabulary word, then you need to have it in a written form. It needs to be exposure, and it needs to be visual for a student to better understand this knowledge or this word. Claire Siebold highlights the importance of visuals. She highlights the importance of visuals for ELLs who need to see something like a picture or a photograph or an object to make an association between the word and that visual. Jane Wagstaff does an excellent job of adding visuals. For example, the word apple, which is different in Spanish. So now a student that is in ELL can make that association of, oh, okay, apple, that's this word right here with this picture, that's manzana. Now I know that manzana is apple. And so bringing in all these strategies, you have effective word wall instruction. The only thing is, a lot of times students don't necessarily reference the word walls. And so word walls now have evolved to best meet the needs of students. Meek Sun in 2013 introduces the e-word wall, which is aimed towards students with learning disabilities. And this e-word wall allows students to have a portable device where they can constantly access their word wall whenever they need it. Now you have word walls eating into things like interactive word walls. And interactive word walls are research-based. A lot of the work that we see now for interactive word walls is based off Dr. Julie Jackson and her research. Dr. Julie Jackson, Tripp, and Cox provide components of interactive word walls. These are research-based again because they reference work from CUIN in 1985 and the importance of instruction from the SIOP model, or the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol model. They bring in different strategies to combine into what makes up an interactive word wall. One of the major components of an interactive word wall is that of realia. Realia is anything that's tangible, anything that students can touch, they can get their hands on it. And so now it's also targeting kinesthetic learning. Students that need to be able to physically touch something to learn a new word. The picture that is shown here actually is an interactive word wall that was created in my second grade science classroom. It's patterns of movement and motion, and something that Dr. Julie Jackson also notes the importance of graphic organizers. And if you notice on the picture, on the photograph, it is patterns of movement and motion. It has been created in the form of a column, a 3-column chart, and we categorize the words roll, spin, and slide. The only thing that I added on here was the title and part of the form of the word wall. The rest was done by students. The stickers, the marble for roll, the spinner for spin, the pom-pom for slide. When we were discussing spin, our students created the definition for spin, and they created the other ones as well. But something that I want to note here that's important is this highlighter. This highlighter is realia brought from home. The other 3 that you see above are realia from the classroom that the students chose. But the one from the bottom is actually something that a student brought in the next day, saying, you know what, I noticed that if I lay this highlighter flat, it actually spins. And so we added the highlighter to the word wall, and now this student has that clear, concise connection that this type of object can spin. Another important component of interactive word walls is the use of cognates. So a cognate is a word that looks like a word in English, and it sounds almost the same, and it means the same thing. In addition to that, you also want to make sure to think about prefixes and suffixes so that students are better able to understand parts of the words and better make associations of what a word is or means. There are many advantages and disadvantages to interactive word walls. Well, more advantages. The advantages is student engagement. That's one of the first things that I think of when I think of interactive word walls. Students are constantly engaging with the vocabulary that is being taught in the classroom, because not only is it making them think at a higher order level of thinking, because they're the ones that have to come up with the definitions with teacher guidance, of course, at a second grade level, but they're also making the interactive word wall, which is yet another perk. The teacher makes a template, but that's it. The students are then in charge of creating the word wall and making it their own. Now, one thing that you want to remember when making these interactive word walls is providing students with a graphic organizer or some type of concept map for the rest of the students to follow as students add to the word wall, because then they're writing, they're cementing that information in their minds as well. It's no longer just memorizing the word. Interactive word walls allow students to apply knowledge, because now they have to create their definitions on their own. And they have to also learn to speak academically. Something that you can do as a teacher is have students create written responses. And so now you're including other topics, other content areas as well. One of the disadvantages that I did notice with word walls is that it's time consuming. Students really have to create the word wall on their own, but then the teachers have to pre-plan. And this pre-planning takes a lot of time, because again, you have to consider realia, you have to consider prefixes, suffixes, you have to consider cognates. Not only that, you have to make sure that as an educator, you look at the TEKS, the Texas essential skills and knowledge. And so it's very time consuming. Another thing that could be a disadvantage is that you teach these interactive word wall lessons to a whole group at an elementary setting. There is research shown by Harmon in 2009 that has activities like color coding or creating definitions in small groups, but this is at a middle school level. And so something that probably needs to be further researched is how do you create interactive word walls at a small group setting. So instruction delivery, this is kind of where I go over the sheltered instruction observation protocol model and Jackson's Tripp and Cox mode of instruction, how to plan a word wall. So the SIOP model essentially follows in plan with Jackson, Tripp, and Cox mode of instruction. It's lesson preparation, which again, it's time consuming with a word wall, but it's worth it. Building background, comprehensible input, strategies, interaction, practice, application, lesson delivery, and review and assessment. This SIOP model has been shown to benefit ELL instruction. And so when you look at Jackson, Tripp's, and Cox mode of instruction, you see these components of the SIOP model being targeted. The first thing that you need to do when planning an interactive word wall is to plan. Create the sketch of what your word wall is going to look like. You need to look at the TEKS and carefully think of which vocabulary words you want to target. Now, Jackson does reference CUIN's 1985 work. When you are thinking of creating a word wall, you need to keep in mind that ELLs need to learn cognitive, academic, language proficiency words known as CAPS. But then you also have, which is the academic vocabulary, but then you also have to take into consideration that students that are ELLs also need to learn basic interpersonal communicative skills, or BICS. So students have to know CALPS and BICS. So in planning these word walls, you have to take all of that into consideration. Once you are done planning, you then create the student worksheets. This is where you would create the graphic organizer that we spoke about earlier. You could create sentence stems to add for differentiation. And this is the worksheet that students are going to follow as the class completes the word wall together. The next thing that you have to consider is placement. Placement is crucial. Students need to be able to constantly access the word wall. The next thing is building. When you are building the word wall, it's not you building the word wall. It's the students building the word wall. They're getting empowered. They're taking charge, and they're making the definitions and having those higher order thinking skills activated, because they're constantly having to think of how do these words interrelate with each other. Students complete the word wall. That's the last step. Students are adding the definitions, bringing in the realia, and if they don't have it, then obviously as an educator you bring it in. Students need to be the ones that create the word walls and interact with them to absorb and retain the information. And so one activity that you could do, and this is going to tie into interactive word walls in mathematics, is having claim evidence and reasoning statements. This is a type of written response. Going back to interactive activities, you have lots of scaffolding in an ELL classroom. And so again, for example, with your graphic organizer, you're going to provide sentence stems for the students, or you can create some of the words pre-written so that they don't misspell them. Jacobson, Lapp, and Flood list various activities that you do with your students in order for them to better understand the concept or a word. So things like constant exposure, illustration, categorizing the words, and then creating that definition on their own, or making a skit. Claire Siebold has the repetition cycle, which essentially the students have constant exposure again to these vocabulary words so that they can learn them and understand them. Harmon et al., they reference higher order levels of thinking, where you can ask a student, okay, well, if you notice a certain structure, what function could be completed through this structure in science? Jackson and Narvaez in 2013 provide the method of planning, and so they list the 5 essential steps that have been discussed. But here you see an example of an interactive word wall worksheet for students. You have to be able to have a student understand a concept, so it goes from abstract to concrete, and the graphic organizers do a very good job of completing this task. Implementation in a mathematics classroom strategy that can be applied in mathematics classroom settings are, again, things like the kids create their definitions. You have, this is where I bring in claims, evidence, and reasoning statements. Students have to not only justify how they came up with an answer, but they also have to be able to justify the concept. There needs to be further research in mathematics classroom interactive word walls. And this is something that I want to be able to conduct a study on and get more data. Thank you for listening in. These are my references. that were on both the presentation and the